This is Jay Sekulow in Washington, D.C. The issue is the terrorism trial of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed in New York City. My guest, former Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft. This is not getting discussed on the mainstream media. Not only are they wrong legally, but the fact that they would do this is outrageous. This is an overreaction and really nonsense. How would you react if this was your son or your daughter? It's the offense of knowing the truth. It's the offense of having an alternate worldview. Saying God bless you to someone is not a violation of the law. Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. We're going to be joined in the next segment of the broadcast by former Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft. Here's the reason we've asked General Ashcroft to be with us. As you know, the Department of Justice and the Obama administration have made the determination that, in fact, the trial of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed will, in fact, take place in New York City. Now, this is a terrorist who has absolutely stated that he was the mastermind of 9/11. He doesn't dispute it. He's proud of it. He wants to make a mockery of our judicial system. This is going to be a jihadist trial, and the jihad will be taking over our civilian court system in New York City, the scene of the focus scene of the 9/11 attacks. Now, the outrage on this, Jordan, has been huge, and Senator Lindsey Graham's taking direct action. We'll hear from him in just a moment. But this is a big deal, folks, because in the last terrorism trial in New York City, remember, they could not get the death penalty. That's the problem in these cases. They're not going to get the death penalty. And more than that, the individual terrorists here were not Mirandized. You know, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, because you're trying to get information from these individuals who have already confessed to it. They're going to utilize the court system to spew their jihad.
That's right. I mean, their attorneys have basically already said that they are going to go there. They're not pleading guilty, even though many of them have already admitted to these attacks, including Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. They're going to plead not guilty, and then they're going to explain why they're not guilty. And it's not that they didn't do the acts. It's that they're going to say they were justified in their behavior, and they're going to tell the world, not just those of us in the United States, but tell the world, including jihadists and those like Major Nadal Hassan, who were in Fort Hood, who are sleeper jihadists, basically, right on the edge of possibly committing these kind of acts. They're going to give them signals and messages that you and I may not even pick up, that someone like that will then turn them into a domestic terrorist.
When Attorney General Eric Holder made the announcement that they were, in fact, going to have these trials in civilian courts rather than a military tribunal, Lindsey Graham questioned Eric Holder. Take a listen, soundbite 2 here. This is Senator Graham discussing this issue with Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States.
If we captured bin Laden tomorrow, would he be entitled to Miranda warnings at the moment of capture?
Again, I'm not. That all depends. I mean,
well, it does not depend. If you're going to prosecute anybody in civilian court, our law is clear that the moment custodial interrogation occurs, the defendant, the criminal defendant, is entitled to a lawyer and to be informed of their right to remain silent. The big problem I have is that you're criminalizing the war. That if we caught bin Laden tomorrow, we have mixed theories and we couldn't turn him over to the CIA, the FBI, or military intelligence.
And Lindsey Graham is absolutely correct. And in another broadcast, Senator Graham will be joining us on this issue. Look, I mean, the fact of the matter is, Jordan, this is a significant fight. We've got a lot of calls. I'm going to try to get a call in here. We're going to be joined by Attorney General John Ashcroft in just a moment. Let's try to grab one call before the break.
Chuck's calling from Massachusetts on line 2. Chuck, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Chuck.
Do you know that some of the attorneys that represented these detainees in the past are today working in the Department of Justice, including one who is a Deputy Solicitor General who had represented them before? The question is, where is their loyalty, or have they recused themselves?
They have not recused themselves, number one. Their loyalty is to their philosophical position, and you're right. The lawyers that were representing the detainees in Guantanamo Bay are now running the Department of Justice, and that includes, Jordan, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States.
That's right. Eric Holder, some deputy AGs, deputy solicitor generals, all who in their pro bono work, that means for free, they are representing Gitmo detainees for the purpose of how do you get them out of Guantanamo Bay. That's what they were trying to do.
Now they
get these official roles. Boom, these 5 guys out of Guantanamo Bay.
Fortunately, the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, has made the determination to introduce legislation to divest jurisdiction from these federal courts. If you don't want to see civilian trials for Khalid Shaikh Mohammed and the other 9/11 terrorists in New York City, then let's back Senator Graham's legislation. Here's the number. I want to encourage every one of you to make a stand here. I think we're going to win this, and those trials will not take place in New York City. They'll be back in the military tribunals where they belong. Here's the number: 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255. Backing legislation to make sure the federal courts do not have civilian jurisdiction over the terrorist trials out of New York. Folks, we don't want to give them the right to remain silent. We want to know the information of what they've planned and what they are planning. If you're concerned about our national security and don't want to see those trials in New York City, go to your phones right now, 877-989-2255 or aclj.org. Back with Attorney General John Ashcroft in just a moment.
President Obama has decided to bring the worst of the worst, the terrorists responsible for the tragedy of 9/11, to U.S. soil to stand trial. President Obama is planning to try these terrorists in civilian courts, a move that many, including Senator Lindsey Graham, believe will put our war on terrorism in jeopardy.
The big problem I have is that you're criminalizing the war.
Senator Graham understands that moving terrorists to civilian courts is a dangerous move that will empower the terrorists with rights afforded only to U.S. citizens. Such a move would limit and even exclude important evidence against the terrorists and even give terrorists a platform to spew hate and incite more violence. Stand with the American Center for Law and Justice and support Senator Graham's legislative effort to keep the terrorists out of civilian courts. Add your name of support right now. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online at aclj.org.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. In just a moment, we're going to be joined by former Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft. But I want to, before we have General Ashcroft on, folks, this is an issue that I am very concerned about. I went up to New York City after this announcement was made. I met with some of our staff in New York. You know, we have an office right down the street from the United Nations. We do a lot of work on national security issues out of our New York City office. And I met with a number of people in New York City, friends, Republicans, Democrats, independents. All of them were concerned about this. All of them can't believe that the Department of Justice is authorizing the trial of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, the acknowledged mastermind, confessed mastermind of 9/11, in civilian courts in New York City rather than in the military tribunals. What makes it worse is he is admitted, acknowledged, and is proud of the fact that he was the mastermind of 9/11. None of that probably will be admissible in a courtroom. That's the outrage of what's taken place in this situation. Here's what I need you to do. Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, has introduced legislation that specifically states these trials do not take place in the civilian courts, period. That's how straightforward the legislation is. I need you to go to your phones right now, add your name of support to this petition. We must speak out on this. We must make sure these trials do not take place in New York City of these terrorists. 1-877-989-2255. That's 877-989-2255. You can also go to aclj.org. But let me encourage you, make that call now at 877-989-2255. Now, it is my privilege to introduce to our audience, who knows really no introduction necessary here. He's been on this radio broadcast, on our television broadcast many, many times, the former Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft. General Ashcroft, it's always great to be with you, and thanks for coming to the studios today.
My pleasure again to join in.
Let me ask you this. I mean, this is the reaction when the current Attorney General, Eric Holder, made the determination to have the trial of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed in New York City was dramatic, not just over our phones, but I went to New York, met with a number of lawyers, a number of other well-known people in the community. And Republicans and Democrats are really very, very concerned about this, both from a security standpoint, but also from the message it's sending. What's your sense of the decision and what it means? I don't want to have you violate anything, of course, in making these statements, but you were there right in the middle of this. What's your sense of what this decision means?
Well, at the very deepest level, it may mean that this administration repudiates the concept that we were ever at war with terrorists. You normally try war crimes in a war crime tribunal, in a commission, and if you decide that this isn't worthy of adjudication in that setting, the setting that usually tries violations of the terms and conditions of war, then maybe what you're saying is there was never a war. We were just involved in some criminal activity. I certainly reject that. I think the entire nation rejects it. The Congress of the United States rejected it with the authorization to use military force. It was well understood in September of 2001 that we indeed were at war and that a great deal of what America stands for was under attack and in many ways seriously threatened. So I'd hate to think that that's what this administration, which has constantly retreated from the vocabulary of war, I'd hate to think that they were actually repudiating the fact that we indeed were at war. I would also observe that while this is a decision that has been embraced by the Attorney General, I think this is a decision that could only be made by the President of the United States.
Absolutely.
I don't think the Attorney General has the authority to go to the Defense Department.
Sure, absolutely not.
And to say to the Secretary of Defense, yes, you have jurisdiction. You have the mechanisms for adjudicating the offenses against the law of war that would lie against these individuals, but I, with my authority, am going to overrule the Defense Department.
Right.
The Defense Department, the Secretary of Defense, is one of the 4 initial cabinet members of this democracy from the very beginning. And for the Attorney General to wrest from the control of the Defense Department individuals who would otherwise be adjudicated there and take them into Article III courts requires at least the substantial acquiescence of the President,
well, the President,
if not the direction of the President.
The President said he's, quote, fully in support of this. So this is something Jordan and I have been talking about. And the reaction, you've taught many courses now to our students at Regent University, where Jordan graduated, where the governor from Virginia is a law school graduate of at Regent University School of Law. And in those courses, I've been in those courses with you, in those lectures, you've talked about the different engagement level that had to be made when we were attacked and that we were at war and the rules were different. And there does seem to be this administration denial of the reality of the war that we're in.
Well, it's certainly one way to interpret this, and it certainly seems to signal that, especially when you consider it in conjunction with the repudiation of the language of war. They don't want to talk about the war on terror. So I think that's really, I can understand that they may want to achieve something else with these trials than the ultimate security and safety of Americans. They may want to send a message to certain people in certain communities around the world that we're going to be generous, that we're going to be...
But why would you be generous, General, with the acknowledged mastermind of 9/11, who has himself acknowledged his culpability and liability?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be.
Right. And I just don't understand. I understand that they may be trying to do some international foreign policy situation. Well, but really, I mean, this guy's admitted he's done it, none of which will be, unfortunately, many of which may not be admissible.
Jay, I think the thing is here, you'd ask a similar question. Why would you go around the world apologizing for the behavior of America in defending freedom? Mm-hmm. But part of this administration's policy has been to go and make apologies for what we have done to defend the lives, the safety, security, and the liberty of the people of the United States of America.
Well, and it's something, too, that the people picked up on radio. The fact was the people at the Department of Justice now, a lot of these attorneys, were in their pro bono work representing these Guantanamo detainees. They were in... General Holder was doing that, as well as some of the deputy attorney generals.
Deputy Solicitor General also.
And now their position is to be, the prosecutors of them, and they've been fighting the whole time to get them out of Guantanamo Bay, and now they've done it.
Well, at least they want them out of Guantanamo Bay. There are going to be people there. The Congress is not complicit in that. The Congress refuses to fund the transportation of people out of Guantanamo Bay to places of detention in the United States. And this is, frankly, this isn't a coherent policy in my judgment. If the ultimate objective of the policy is to protect the security and safety of Americans, not only does this invite destabilizing the New York community, which a terrorist community might want to do to disrupt a trial or to otherwise make a statement to the world at time of trial, but the invitation to the compromise of intelligence sources and intelligence information that relates to this case and relates to our defense as a society is one that poses a risk that I don't understand what would justify taking that risk.
I was up in New York shortly after the decision was made in Manhattan. I know you spent a lot of time in New York City, so do I, and Jordan was there, and we talked to a number of people, and really very much a cross-section of the New York population, New York City population, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, people that were very supportive of President Obama, but not on this issue, people that were very critical of the president, current president, because of his statements about this not being a real war, not using the war language, but also kind of repudiating that we're in a war. Jordan, my sense was, and then I want to get General Ashcroft's comment on this, was there is some real anxiety when you talk to people in New York City about what's at stake here.
Yeah, we've talked
including
a lot about,
the governor of New York.
We've talked a lot about the precedents that this would set to try these terrorists here in New York City. But to talk to the people who actually live in New York, the security concern, the fact is it's again another reminder of what it was like that day for those many who lost. I mean, I heard someone who was talking about this who said, "Yeah, listen, I lost 700 coworkers that day, and the difference was because I got to work late and I slept in that day." and I mean that's the situation you're in, where people. This is another reminder, and they realize that this is not only allowing these terrorists who planned it and were proud of it to speak again, but it's also a call for jihadists. I mean, talking about another target here just a few blocks away, the courthouse from Ground Zero.
I was going to follow up on that.
It's kind of interesting to me, and I know you have your pulse on the entirety of America because of your outreach with the program, but I happen to be in Kansas right in the aftermath of the decision, and was doing some work in the Kansas City area, and there was to be an open house at a community center, which it had been forecast we might have 50 people show up for. There were between 200 and 300 people who showed up, and while they had been convened to discuss other issues, all they wanted to talk to me about was this issue. And I think it was primarily because this is something that is far broader than New York. The attack on New York was understood by Americans to be an attack on our values, our freedom, the liberties and security of the United States and our citizens, and they feel that a less than thoroughgoing, serious, less than aggressive response by way of adjudicating the violations of the law of war, which resulted in the deaths of nearly 3,000 Americans, a less than aggressive response in that respect is an outrage.
If you're concerned about our country, if you're concerned about our future, I want to encourage you to go to your phones right now. I want to back Senator Lindsey Graham's move to divest the federal courts of jurisdiction of these 9/11 trials. You go to your phones right now. Have your voice heard on this critical issue. The number to sign the petition supporting that legislation to divest these courts, 1-877-989-2255. Let me give you that number again. It's 1-877-989-2255. Now, you can also go to aclj.org. We've got a lot of information posted there. We'll keep you updated as this legislation goes forward. Folks, I believe we can win this, but I must have your help to do it. We already have 45 senators we know that are going to vote for this. We need 6 more, and I believe we can do it. And what a victory that will be, and what a stinging rebuke to the Department of Justice and to the Obama administration on this issue it will be, and it needs to be. This is dangerous for America. 1-877-989-2255 if you want to make sure those terrorist trials for Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, does not take place in the United States. That's 877-989-2255 or aclj.org. Have your voice heard. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
President Obama has decided to bring the worst of the worst, the terrorists responsible for the tragedy of 9/11, to U.S. soil to stand trial. President Obama is planning to try these terrorists in civilian courts, a move that many, including Senator Lindsey Graham, believe will put our war on terrorism in jeopardy.
The big problem I have is that you're criminalizing the war.
Senator Graham understands that moving terrorists to civilian courts is a dangerous move that will empower the terrorists with rights afforded only to U.S. citizens. Such a move would limit and even exclude important evidence against the terrorists and even give terrorists a platform to spew hate and incite more violence. Stand with the American Center for Law and Justice and support Senator Graham's legislative effort to keep the terrorists out of civilian courts. Add your name of support right now. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online at aclj.org.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everybody, and it's been a great time having former Attorney General John Ashcroft here, of course, a professor at Regent University School of Law. Before we get back to our interview here, General, I want to let everybody know that we need your help on this. You've heard what General Ashcroft said. This is a critically important issue for our nation's freedom. We don't want to see the trial of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, taking place here in New York City or in Washington, D.C., for that matter. Could you imagine putting these guys in place in Washington, New York, where the attacks took place? It's absurd. It makes no legal sense. It makes no political sense, and it's dangerous for our future. So here's what I want you to do. You go to your phones right now. Here's the number, 1-877-989-2255. You're signing a petition supporting Senator Lindsey Graham's legislation, which will divest the federal courts of this jurisdiction. That's 1-877-989-2255. That's 877-989-2255 or aclj.org. We've got a criminal proceeding now going on in civilian courts with Khalid Shaikh Mohammed. We've got Senator Lindsey Graham that is introducing legislation to divest the federal courts of jurisdiction. He's a military lawyer. I mean, he is a military lawyer, and he's been critical of some of the policies of President Bush back a number of years ago. But he's also very concerned about this decision. She wants to divest jurisdiction. And one of the things he said, which you've said actually prior to hearing it from Senator Graham, the difference between these civil courts and a court-martial are huge. We're not giving people the Miranda warnings, these terrorists that you're caught on the battlefield. Our soldiers are not engaging in police investigations. This is a different kind of litigation.
Well, it most certainly is. And if you plan from the beginning to adjudicate charges against an individual in the Article III courts, civilian courts of the United States, you tailor the way you detain a person, the way you might interrogate a person, the way you handle a person for that kind of ultimate adjudication. If you expect ultimately to adjudicate charges that were violations of the law of war, you would handle a person differently. And our objective in handling a number of detainees was that we would try to maximize what we could learn to help the United States defend itself from additional attacks.
So giving someone the right to remain silent under the Miranda warnings is dangerous for national security.
Well, I don't think there's any question about it. Not only giving them the right, but arming them with the lawyers and providing a variety of other things that would be provided in the normal sort of course of a detention that was predicated on the expectation of a civilian trial.
So we've got a situation now where we find ourselves in this. I mean, as it stands right now, these trials go forward, and I think that this legislation that Senator Graham's put forward is probably going to pass because the momentum seems to be moving that direction. The public outcry on this, the first day when you came on the air, the very first day this broke on the radio broadcast, we had more calls in that 30 minutes on that topic than we've had on any other topic we have covered on this broadcast over the last 17 years. And I will tell you, we have handled some very, as you know, very controversial topics on this program
that
have gotten and you have been associated with, right? But this one has struck a different chord. And what we're trying to get our pulse on right now, and I did this when I went to New York, really spending time with the citizens of New York. We look at it; those that are outside of New York or Washington tend to look at 9/11 as something that happened 8, 9, going on 9.5 years ago by the time these trials might go, maybe 10 years, maybe a decade ago. But for the people of New York City and Washington, this is not ancient history. This is reality.
Yeah. There's a kind of indelibility of memory, sort of a marking that does not fade when the proximity to the event. For those of us that literally could smell the smoke of the Pentagon, and literally I was at the Twin Tower sites when they were hauling the remains of those who were killed in the building out of the tragic center there that was attacked. There's a kind of marking that has happened in the very persona of that community that is not fading, and it shouldn't fade. Part of, I think, one of the parts of the television culture in which we live is that we expect most situations to be resolved in a half hour because that's the program length of most things. We expect 3 or 4 commercial breaks, and when it's over, it's all done and it's finished. Well, that's not so with the defense of freedom and liberty. And the cultures that are arrayed against the United States in terms of the assault on liberty, they're not episodic. They don't think of this as a little episode that'll be over and then it's done. They're intergenerational. They say to each other, what I don't do during my lifetime, you will do in your lifetime, or my grandchildren will do in their lifetime. And we need to understand that in defending this country, when we win a 30-minute segment, yes, we've won that segment. We've won the war for that period, but it's not over.
Let me say this to prospective students out there, parents that may have young people that want to attend law school or government school. We've got a very unique program at Regent University. In addition to the on-campus program in Virginia Beach, which is a magnificent campus, where you have professors like John Ashcroft. I teach courses there as well. Let me tell you what else we do. We have programs overseas, and those overseas programs, whether it's in Israel, at Hebrew University, or whether it's at the University of Strasbourg in France, where the heart of the European Union is, we have justices, including the president of the European Court of Human Rights, lecturing our students. This is a very unique aspect of the education that students get at Regent.
Yeah, it's hands-on. It has a tangibility, as they say in the intelligence community, a granularity. It has real texture.
You can feel it.
And when you're dealing with the individuals who are involved in their day-to-day struggles to sustain liberty, whether it's in the European Court of Human Rights, or whether it's in the situation in Israel and the Middle East, where a terrorist attack is a daily occurrence. We are involved in daily terrorist defense. They're involved in daily terrorist attack.
And big difference.
And there's a big difference. But these are the kinds of things that bring reality and bring a sense of seriousness, sobriety, if you will, to the developments that we've witnessed in the law and our study of those developments.
John Ashcroft, former Attorney General of the United States, again, and a good friend. Thanks for being with us.
It's always an honor.
Well, I want to thank General Ashcroft again, and thank all of you for joining us on the broadcast today. We're glad we're having our television audience in here in our radio studios today. We're right here in Washington, D.C., right across the street from the United States Supreme Court, a block from the Senate, right across from the Senate offices. Senator Graham has the bill that is going to divest the federal courts of jurisdiction of the Khalid Shaikh Mohammed trial. We don't need to see that happen in our domestic civilian courtrooms, folks. We can win this. I really believe that. I said that before the last break. I really believe we can win this. I need your help on this. Here's the number for you to go to your phones right now and say, I'm supporting Senator Graham's legislation. I'm supporting the ACLJ's effort to make sure those trials do not take place in New York City. Here's the number. It's 1-877-989-2255. Let me give you that number again. It's 877-989-2255 to make sure the trial of Khalid Shaikh Mohammed does not take place in New York City. The mastermind of 9/11 that brought havoc on New York City should not be brought back there for a trial. He is a terrorist. This isn't a criminal investigation. Again, that number, 877-989-2255 or aclj.org. We'll talk to you next week.
President Obama has decided to bring the worst of the worst, the terrorist responsible for the tragedy of 9/11, to U.S. soil to stand trial. President Obama is planning to try these terrorists in civilian courts, a move that many, including Senator Lindsey Graham, believe will put our war on terrorism in jeopardy.
The big problem I have is that you're criminalizing the war.
Senator Graham understands that moving terrorists to civilian courts is a dangerous move that will empower the terrorists with rights afforded only to U.S. citizens. Such a move would limit and even exclude important evidence against the terrorists and even give terrorists a platform to spew hate and incite more violence. Stand with the American Center for Law and Justice and support Senator Graham's legislative effort to keep the terrorists out of civilian courts. Add your name of support right now. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online at aclj.org.